The kind of pressure that a lot of students from our community are facing is highly comparative in nature. And I think that's, for me, that's the most toxic form, right? When performance is measured from within a student's context of their frame, their abilities, their interests, that usually is a very wholesome and a very, it brings the student life and energy when students are shown how they can flourish and actualize. But when students are measured in terms of how well they are compared to their peers across a whole host of sort of metrics, I think that's when the pressure becomes something that is usually quite difficult, especially when there's a comparative, you know, this person has done this so well, I'm sort of failing, without giving the space for a growth mindset. And for me, and what I've seen really works is when a student is really focused and geared in on the growth mindset, which is, it doesn't matter where you are right now. It doesn't matter where it more matters about how we can move from where we are to where we're going. Yeah. Because I don't believe that there should be excessive academic pressure during the junior years of whether primary school or the junior years of high school. That's sort of fermented in a lot of experience that I've seen where students are given an excessive amount of burden during the younger years and they sort of burn out by the end of it. I'll speak to that experience, like sort of the later experience, the year 9, year 10, year 11, year 12. During these years, managing mental health is a very serious matter, because we know one of two things can happen. Either the studies themselves can impact the student's mental health, or it can be things external to the study environment that are impacting their capacity to study. So obviously, if there are external factors that are very serious, then that needs professional, clinical and or psychotherapeutic attention pretty much straight away, right? We want to encourage those kind of students to look, there's issues. We as teachers can do a little bit, but only so much. We're not trained in the same way that a psychoanalyst or a psychotherapist or a psychologist would be trained, or even a school counselor for that matter. So we notice the signs, but we want the student to be getting the attention that they need, the sort of needs at a level of what's happening at home, what's happening with themselves. Now, if that happens to be external. But a lot of the time, and this is now a very real phenomena, the school environment and the pressure environment and the parents and the peers, that is the locus of stress. Now, when that happens, it's a different beast. It's difficult in the sense that you have to balance these two things. Number one, you have to balance the real possibility that if a student does not exert some level of effort or some level of investment into themselves and their future, then that itself becomes a deterioration of the self. That itself becomes a reason for self-resentment. They'll start to think like, I'm not good enough. And they're not good enough because they're not doing the work, right? And it becomes this repeated cycle. They're not exercising, they're not eating well, they're not going out with their friends as much. Their friends are at a different level to they are. So all of those pressures start to then affect the student in a particular way, right? So not achieving the goals that you set for yourself itself can be a matter of stress. It's like when you set the bar at a particular level and you're constantly striving below that. So that's on the one level. We want to encourage students to set realistic, attainable goals that are within their reach, and then do everything they can to meet those. And secondly, we want to make sure that those goals are sort of tunnel-minded. When I say tunnel-minded, I mean it should be independent of everyone else. Like when I was at Sydney Boys, the competition is fierce. It's actually scary sometimes how competitive some of these schools are, right? Whether you talk about Sydney Boys, any of the modern selective schools, the environments that they grow up in are ruthless, right? I had an assessment once where I got 82.5 out of 84, right? 82 point, that's 1.5 marks dropped. I didn't even make top 30, right? And so if I'm measuring myself based on how he's doing, how they're doing, how this person's son is doing, then it becomes a constant crippling pressure where instead of focusing on the richness of what you're learning, right? Instead of focusing on the beauty of what's in front of you, which is the chance to grow, the chance to learn something new, the chance to solve this particular mathematical or scientific or literary puzzle, right? Instead of letting that experience flourish in a particular way, we're now focused on outcomes and outcomes only, right? And I think that's a big part of, I guess, to some extent, I don't even fully blame the migrant experience, because the migrant experience, speaking about, for example, my parents, they come from a place where if the outcomes are not met, then poverty is the potential solution, like potential alternative. It's a real factor, right? If you don't make it, there are existential threats to you, the family unit, the parental unit, the husband, the wife, the children, all of it. And that's huge, right? That's a level of pressure that they have had. And honestly, kudos to my mother and father and the entire generation of migrants that have gone through that post-colonial experience, because they had to really battle it out. But to some extent, to bring that same level of stake, because the stakes are a little bit different here, to bring those same level of stakes in an environment such as Sydney, it's possible that there's a slight displacement, right? A displacement between what was imagined and what was real for two very different generations. And so the challenges that face our kids, right? The challenges that I think are, yes, 100% these kids need to be academically minded. They need to be focused. They need to be driven, because we know that those traits of conscientiousness, discipline, hard work, they end up becoming the fruits, the seeds by which later fruits develop. We know that. We know that it's actually, in the long term, good for a person's growth and well-being. But they need to be, our drive for excellence needs to be managed so that the excesses don't become overwhelming. The excesses can be very overwhelming for a student, for their peers. It can become like a cycle by which a student just becomes so engrossed in, let's say, one particular area, right, which might be studies. And see, hypothetically, they might even do quite well in it. But whether or not that's the only path and that's the only locus by which, they invest all of their energy in this one thing and they're going to become successful human beings, I think that's a problematic outlook on life. Because we know that a student is more than their marks. We know that a student is the sum of a whole bunch of different parts. It's their well-being. It's how well they are engaging with friends. It's how well they are integrating and understanding the society and their peers around them. It's how well they can express themselves in terms of what they want, what their aspirations are, what their feelings are, along with, what society and the market demands of them. All right, so this nexus of demands that are placed on this new student, their study is one piece of it, right? Sports is another piece of it. It's very important that as South Asian guardians, parents, teachers, in our context, we need to take into account this multifaceted vision of what it means for a person to be successful. The students that aspire for the highest echelon of marks, the biggest downfall for this category of students is their perfectionism, right? They are such ardent perfectionists, and very often we're talking about what's called the golden child, right? In the family. So the idea of a golden child is, the parents see them as a young toddler. They learn a little bit quicker than the rest of the kids. They seem to be getting good grades very early on in primary school, and so that expectation mounts and mounts and mounts, and they have this vision of what's going to be the golden child. And this golden child then gets into year 11, year 12, and they're carrying the full burden of being the best from a very young age, And especially if they're in an environment where it's highly competitive, that burden that's painful, right? So just to give you an example, in extension 2 maths, which is the highest level of mathematics, this is something that a lot of parents need to understand. Getting an 80 is not bad. Like parents very often, because they might not be acquainted with the full range of what it means to be getting 1 mark versus the other, right? Getting an 80 and ranking, let's say 40th in Sydney boys, like that might actually be the best. Like your kid has tried his best, his or her best, and they really are pulling their weight. And that's something that you can say, you know what, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. Let's see where we can take this journey, right? Understanding that once you're at a particular level of competition, that there's going to be such different levels between, let's say, the first, second, third, fourth, 20th, that again, that tunnel mindset becomes more important. That tunnel mindset of, look, let's ignore the voices of everyone that wants to compare around me and hone in on what my goals are. So the perfectionism really comes in when a student demands only the best of themselves, right? And nothing other than like what they deem to be, or what their parents and what they imagine to be 100%. Now we know that's a problem. We know that's a problem. For example, if the same person wants to start a coding project and start a website, they'll never start because it's never perfect enough. They want to start a business, they'll never start. They'll never take that first step. Why? Because it's never perfect enough, right? They want to write an essay, they'll never start. They'll never write that first paragraph because it's never perfect enough. And in having that perfectionist mindset, it's ironic that they're trying to be at this one level, and because they imagine themselves there, they're neither performing, and nor is it good for their mental well-being, right? Because they're always sub perfection. So I think for that particular level of students, I found that perfectionism, in some senses, can be a blessing, obviously, right? Striving for the best, but most of the time it's actually not a good thing. We know that the people that have achieved big things, right? The people that have founded Apple, these huge multi-billion-dollar companies, they're perfectionists in process. They're not perfectionists in outcome. They know they're going to make mistakes. They know that when they get started, it's going to be an ugly mess in the beginning, right? But it's about the iterative process of growth. It's having that growth mindset that's going to be so important.